transphobia or sexism or homophobia or racism, they could sue you for defamation with a penalty of up to $35,000. Interestingly enough, usually the defense of defamation is truth is an absolute defense against defamation. So there is a separate paragraph that says that you cannot use their religious or scientific beliefs to prove truth of your accusation. And so basically, a pastor, for instance, could get up on the pulpit and spew a bunch of hateful rhetoric, and you could not call that pastor transphobic or homophobic without risking a $35,000 lawsuit.
That's insane. I mean, that sounds like censorship more than anything else to me.
It does, and in fact, this same lawmaker last year was famous for the blogger bill, which made national headlines. It was essentially a bill that would require all bloggers to register with the state if they criticize the government.
Wow. A couple of days ago, you published a piece only 5 days into the new year, and 125 anti-trans pieces of legislation have been introduced around the country. What is the state of the safety of trans people around the nation, and how bad is it getting in red states, and how clearly differentiated are red states from blue states right now on these issues?
Of course. So in the 3 days since I've published that, we are now up to 151, and we continue to grow every day.
Wow.
In terms of safety, I am in touch with many parents, family, friends, et cetera, who are fleeing these states and seeking refuge in blue states. I know some people, for instance, that have fled a state like Alabama to a place like Massachusetts, and they are living out of their van because it is safer right now to be in a van in Massachusetts with your kid than it is to be in Alabama, having your kid pulled off medication and potentially harassed in school, kicked out of bathrooms, and worse. We see bills in some of these states like Florida and Ohio that make it impossible to get your health care. It pulls people off of medication. It makes it in Florida, for instance, if you go to the bathroom that matches your gender identity, if it's not of your assigned sex at birth, you can be in jail for up to a year if somebody tells you to leave. And so the temperature is getting hotter and hotter. And then I want to close off by saying in Texas, even if you leave, even if you get out and you go to Seattle, to Washington State, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, has filed a lawsuit to pull all of those patients back, to pull all of the medical records from Seattle Children's Hospital back into Texas.
So that he can go after these trans people?
Presumably. We know that, for instance, a couple of years ago, he was the one who started child abuse investigations against the parents of trans kids in the state. And judging that he is now trying to grab medical records from out of state, from the people that left Texas, one presumes that he's going to use those records for some legal purpose.
Yeah, this is a guy who proclaims his great morality, but can't keep it in his pants with regard to his cheating on his own wife. It's just bizarre. You published a piece titled Governor DeWine uses anti-abortion tactic to target trans adults with de facto ban. Tell us about that.
Yes, of course. So this is a new tactic that I'm seeing that is an echo of a lot of the abortion bills that we saw during the Roe v. Wade era pre-Dobbs. And so what we're seeing right now is in Ohio. In Ohio, we saw Governor DeWine veto an anti-trans bill that would allow trans youth to obtain gender-affirming care, which was great. It was a great thing that he did. However, he then turned around only 3 or 4 days later and released regulations that essentially they act as laws that do not outright ban gender-affirming care for transgender adults, but make it so that all of the clinics that provide that care would be closed. I'm going to remind your listeners of what happened during the abortion fight whenever they, for instance, passed bills that said that all abortion clinics had to have hallways that were 14 feet wide. And so what that does to all the clinics in the state is it says either you have to tear down your clinic and build it anew and extend out all your hallways, or your clinic is going to shut down because you don't have the money to operate that clinic. So we're seeing the same thing in Ohio. There are a lot of regulations. For instance, they say that a bioethicist has to be on your team and signing off on all your care, as well as a number of other professions. I don't know when the last time you have visited a bioethicist to get basic healthcare needs met, but I'm just saying that that's not part of most of our routines.
Yeah, it's kind of the legal equivalent of being pecked to death by baby ducks. I mean, it's This is crazy. What is your best advice on how to talk to people about this? I mean, let me expand on that a little bit. The first people that Adolf Hitler went after, literally within the first month of his chancellorship in Germany in the early 1930s and 33, were trans people, was the trans community. And because of all the minority groups, racial minority groups, religious minority groups, gender minority groups, of all the various minority groups, trans people are probably the smallest minority of all of them. And the one where, you know, most people don't know a trans person, or at least didn't know. I mean, I think that in some ways we're kind of with this issue where we were with gay issues back in the 1950s and 60s when gay people were just first starting to come out. But in any case, this is how do we best communicate to people who have never met a trans that trans, you know, being trans is a normal thing, that this is part of the spectrum. Find it throughout history and in every Aboriginal and Indigenous community that's ever been examined. And B, that, you know, to do anything else is just pure bigotry. I guess I'm ranting here. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
No, of course. So, you know, I think that that's important. I think that actually talking about the history is important. You know, we have always been here. We are as old as what it means to be human itself. If you go back to the very first example of human authorship in Hedwana, she was the first person who signed her name onto something that was written, and she was writing about a transgender priesthood. If we go to Roman times, you know, we had an empress, Elagabalus, who specifically asked for gender-affirming care and who went by feminine terms. In the 1300s, we had a famous Jewish poet, Kalonymus ben Kalonymus, talk about gender dysphoria. So we have always been here, but just like that, we have always faced struggles. You mentioned accurately about what happened back in the rise of fascism in Germany. And what we saw indeed was the very famous book burning pictures that I'm sure so many of your audience remembers from their history books, the black and white pictures of books burning. Those books were of the first 30 years of transgender research by in the Institute of Sexology by Magnus Hirschfeld, a very famous researcher back then. And so in order to talk about where we are today, I think it's important to recognize that, like, we're in history, we've always been here, we're always going to be here, and we all have to kind of share this space together. And these laws that target us aren't going to eliminate us, it's just going to hurt us.
Yep.
We take life back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the, after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then-Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, hey, happy Martin Luther King Day, happy snow day pretty much all across the country. It's the Iowa caucus day. We're going to find out, how weird the Republican Party is today. An awful lot going on in the program today, and we're live. Which is kind of incredible given how the weather has been here this weekend. We'll see as the week goes on. Tomorrow's going to get weird again. Here in the Pacific Northwest. Got a lot to talk about. I just wanted to share some quick thoughts on Martin Luther King Day in a few moments. Also, blackouts. People all across the country right now are experiencing blackouts. Two pieces to this. Number one, or three pieces, really. Number one, have you heard a single reference in any of the coverage of the storms, the cold that's hitting this country, about the fact that in all probability, this is as severe as it is because of global warming? I realize it's cold, and that sounds contradictory to warming, but anyhow, I'll get to that in a moment. Number two, did you know that you can power your house with an electric vehicle, as long as it's not a Tesla? I'll tell you about that. And how's the Arctic blast treating you? How's the weather where you live? So far, knock wood, we have kept our power and our water, but about a tenth of Portland, over 100,000 people lost their power. Also, in the first hour, the right wing finds out what it's like to have your book banned. I'll tell you, this is kind of a weird, ironic story in just a moment. In the second hour of our program, Trump's closing pitch to the Iowa caucuses is that their vote will help him punish his enemies and take America back to the 1950s. Trickle-down fascism? Yeah, I think so. Also in the second hour is Greg Abbott's humanity non-existent? From fantasizing about shooting people on the border to allowing children and their mother to drown. Greg Abbott's quite proud of himself right now. I'll tell you about that in the second hour of the program. Also in the second hour of the program, wait a minute, Judge Eileen Cannon, the judge who's overseeing and basically doing everything Donald Trump wants, it appears, his documents trial, I guess it was actually an espionage trial. I mean, this is the Espionage Act he's being tried under down in Florida. According to Twitter, now I've been looking for confirmation of this, and it's pretty hard to find. But according to Twitter, her husband used to work for a New York mob boss, who's a major Trump donor and an old friend of Trump's. Weird stuff. And in the third hour of the program, what's up with the Fed? They're trying to shed bonds off their balance sheet. What does that mean? Why should we care? And also a wisdom school alert. Is sauna therapy built into our genes? We'll talk about all those things today. So I wanted to start out with Martin Luther King Day. I get, pretty much everybody and his brother is sending out, particularly all the Substacks, the newsletters, and there's about, 30 or 40 of them that I subscribe to. And they're all, or not all of them, many of them are riffing on Martin Luther King Day today. I thought the best one that I got was from a regular caller to this program, Ron Kenyatta, who publishes over at ROHN is how he spells his first name, ronkenyatta.substack.com. And it's titled, What MLK Would Think Today, Difficult Days Ahead. If you just go over to substack.com and plug in Kenyatta, you'll find it. And, some very thoughtful commentary and perspective. And I just wanted to recommend that to you. If you don't already subscribe to Kenyatta's newsletter, it's really worth checking out. And some good thoughts there. Also, just revisiting America, I think it would not be inappropriate to say that America has had essentially two sets of founding fathers, as it were. I say fathers because they're both men, but or all men, but the ones in 1776, 1787, 1790s, number one, who created this nation, essentially. And then the second incarnation of our nation was the Civil Rights Movement, and specifically, 1963, the March on Washington, led by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, whose birthday is actually today. Today is one of those rare days when Martin Luther King Day actually is his birthday. He was born in 1929 on this day. But that in 63, that then led to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then when Lyndon Johnson got reelected in 1965, he got the Voting Rights Act passed. And also in 65, and this is a big one that is usually kind of falls off the radar screen, was changing our immigration laws. Because in 1924, we got an immigration law that fixed immigration into the United States based on race, so that the percentage of white people in this country would never change. That got blown up in 1965 with the Immigration Reform Act. I think that was the name of it, words to that effect anyway, which did away with the racial quotas. And so, this has led to, in some ways, the so-called browning of America. And I see that as kind of a second start of America. I mean, you go back and look at the number of African Americans who were registered to vote in the South, for example, prior to 1965. And I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but you can look them up. But it was like, this is from my memory, so don't take this as actual numbers, but in this neighborhood, my recollection is that, like in Mississippi, it was around 5 or 6%. In South Carolina, it was around 7%. I mean, just very, under 10% anyway, in much of the South, where black people registered to vote. And of course, now the situation is very different. I think you could add a third, kind of as a codicil, a third group to that, which was women in 1920 who got the right to vote. Or 1919, no, the 19th Amendment in 1920. I always mix those up. In 1964, in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati newspaper had a headline, King hits Goldwater with fascist danger. Kevin Cruz writes about this in his Substack today. This is a quote from a 1964 newspaper. Keeping up with his attack against Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, Reverend Martin Luther King charged this week that Goldwater, quote, represents a political philosophy that could lead America down a fascist path more dangerous than Hitler's Germany. That's pretty serious stuff. He said Senator Goldwater stands for a narrow nationalism, and his trigger-happy philosophy could result in the world being plunged into the abyss of atomic desolation. It's Dr. Martin Luther King. He also, another one of his comments that I think is, prescient's the wrong word, profound. Injustice, this is from his, letter from a Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all directly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. So, I want to honor the day and honor Dr. King, but as Kenyatta points out in his newsletter, talk is cheap, essentially. Everybody's, giving lip service to this today, and yet in Iowa there is a specific, I forget what they call them in Iowa, an event. There was a name for the event that was specifically for people of color, Republicans, Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian Republicans, and they're there. There are some. And they've got their own little group. And they got together and they invited all the candidates, and not one single Republican candidate bothered to show up. Not one. So, kind of tells you everything you need to know. All righty. Also, did you know that you can power your house with an electric vehicle? Another reason to consider getting an electric car when your current one croaks. I'll tell you about that. And global warming and freezing cold. Also, the right wing finds out what it's like to have your book banned. Bill O'Reilly's not happy. I'll tell you about that right after this break. And then, of course, we'll be picking up your calls. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And while it looks like, the result of tonight's caucus in Iowa is going to be a preordained conclusion. Love to hear your thoughts on it. And welcome back, Barbara in Tompkinsville, Kentucky. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
Hey, what's on my mind is just Trump. I'm sorry to say, but
it's hard to avoid. It's like you're sitting in a garden party with some friends having lunch, and a poisonous snake is slithering through. You just can't ignore it.
That's true. Last week I heard you talking with a woman that was saying that Trump was not dumb and he was not stupid. He's not dumb. I really am bothered by the lack of precision in our words, but no, he's not dumb because he can speak. He is not an idiot because that's developmentally deficient to the point of a very low measure of ability. He is stupid because that is slow to comprehend and lacking the ability. He doesn't have the intelligence that we measure in IQ as far as reasoning ability or critical thinking ability or how well someone can use facts and logic to deduce. He doesn't have a very strong short-term or long-term memory, either one. He has a lack of general knowledge, which it measures. What he is ignorant, because ignorant, based on the word ignore, an ignorant person ignores facts, ignores the logic. It just ignores facts. Yeah. So he's ignorant. Now, he does have what we call cunning, and that is a skill to deceive. He is cunning. He has the skill to deceive. He knows everything. Right. If you already know everything, you cannot learn anything. And another thing about him lying is a lot of people ask, why would he lie about this? As though liars have good reasons for lying. Now, a narcissist is a liar. They lie. They lie because liars lie. But the thing about a narcissist and lying is the whole thing about truth is they hate truth just like they hate innocence, and they are out to destroy either one. But truth in particular is a valued commodity for the rest of us. So he's out to destroy it, and he plays a game with it, like all narcissists. They play a game. So they'll lie about anything because it's that one-upmanship of lying and getting one over on somebody. I mean, they lie about things that are just like incredibly mundane, no reason. And so for the rest of us, we want to say, well, why would they lie about that? And he will say that. The narcissist will say to you, well, why would I lie about that? I mean, I worked in the court system, and I have assessed deep assessments of thousands of narcissists. And they play that game, but they would often say to me, well, why would I lie? Because that's our mentality.
Yeah.
Of
Do you think that these people actually get a positive emotional, get a charge out of lying to people, getting away with it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's almost like an addiction for them, it seems. Barbara, thank you. Thank you so much for the call and for your insights. Brilliant. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. All righty, welcome back. So my op-ed today over at hartmannreport.com is basically about the weather. The weather is nuts, and which raises the question, why? I mean, this is all over the media. They're like, this is the coldest Iowa caucus in history. In history, it's like 20, 30 below zero in parts of Iowa. Why? Nobody is talking about why. I'm scratching my head on, I remember Louise and I were living in Washington, D.C., and when the Potomac froze, we lived on a boat in the river, and the river froze, and, or the part where our boat was. And that was such a novel experience that people were actually talking about, why is it so cold all of a sudden? And it turns out it's global warming. Global warming is heating up the Arctic 4 times faster than it's heating up the rest of the planet. 4 times faster than it's heating up what are called the mid-latitudes, which is where you and I live, most of North America, or most of the United States. And the difference in temperature between the Arctic air and the mid-latitude air is what creates this river of cold, or keeps in place, rather, this river of cold air that flows around northern Canada and all the way around the planet. It's called the jet stream, the polar jet stream. And the polar jet stream is weakening as a result of global warming, because the difference in temperature between the Arctic and here is what creates that wall, essentially, of the jet stream. And so the jet stream is getting what climatologists call loopy. It kind of drools down over North America. In fact, the jet stream is as far south as Texas right now. Normally, the jet stream doesn't go south of Canada. And again, it's because of global warming. Why isn't that being discussed on television? Why isn't there an article about it in the newspaper? I have no idea. I'm guessing that, no writers and no reporters want to take crap from Republican partisans who are funded by the fossil fuel billionaires. But I don't know. Anyhow, that's how global warming makes it colder, and that's what's going on right now, which, by the way, increases the demand for electricity, and then you get all the high winds that come along, with the jet stream drooling down here also. Like here in Portland, over 100,000 people lost their power, almost all of them because trees blew down on power lines. And this is happening, of course, all over the country. So how can you power your house from your electric vehicle? Well, most of the new electric vehicles, Tesla's the big exception to this, and I'm guessing that's because Tesla sells home power systems, and they don't want to hurt that market by allowing their cars to power your house. They want you to buy one of their Powerwall things. But other than Tesla, most of the new electric vehicles now have what is called either V2L or V2H. Vehicle to load or vehicle to home power systems. I mean, the battery, for example, I have an Ioniq 5. The battery in my car is 77 kilowatts, 77,000 watts. So that will, that'll power your house for days if you've replaced all your light bulbs with LED bulbs that use very little power. And if you've got a gas furnace, for example, it'll power the fan, it'll run it. Typically, they use about 400 watts over the course of an hour, although the newer ones only use 25 watts. They've got really, really efficient, fans now and systems. And the way it works is basically you plug your car into your house. There's a little outfit, a little box called a power transfer switch that you can buy for $250 on Amazon or at your local, hardware store. and you mount this next to your breaker panel, and you connect your car to that box, and then when your power goes out, you turn off your mains and you flip the switch, flip the breakers on this box, and it feeds power from your car to up to 12. The one I have has 6 designated circuits. And so, at our house, we would be powering like the bathroom, the bedroom, my computer, my office, my home office, our living room, our internet router, and I don't know, I'd have to go back and the kitchen, the refrigerator, those 6 circuits. That's pretty much all you need. And my car will power those circuits in my house, depending on how much power I use, but generally speaking, it would power those circuits probably for 4 or 5 days. And there's just, a whole bunch of these cars now that do this. The Ford F-150, the Genesis GV60, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and 6, the Kia EV6 and Niro, the Mitsubishi Outlander, the Nissan Leaf, the Volkswagen ID4, the Volvo EX90, the Chevy Silverado, Blazer, and Equinox, the GMC Sierra Denali, the Cadillac Lyriq, and the Cadillac Escalade. They can all power your house. 4 days. Why aren't these people advertising this? Anyhow, pick up your calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned. Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is just another N-word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examine the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. Gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn. Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
Hey, welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Cliff, what's up?
Hey, good day, Tom. Two things real quick. After 3 years since Uncle Joe became leader of our country, why is Louis DeJoy still in his position? I wish you would explain that to me.
Because only the Postal Board of Governors can fire him. There is an opening there now, and I believe they're waiting on congressional approval, but I could be wrong. I need to get somebody on to give us all the details on this, because I'm not an expert on how the weird inner workings of the Postal Board of Governors.
Good God, what a disaster.
It is.
And anyways, you remember last week what Nancy Mace accused Hunter Biden of not possessing?
Yes, testicles,
yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yes, well, I'm making that same accusation to Merrick Garland. If he had had a pair and would have done his job in the beginning, I don't think this whole thing would be so out of hand. And I think that his cowardice and his inaction has been a real disservice to our democracy. And I wanted to know if he's replaceable. It's probably too late at this point, but could President Biden have replaced him somewhere along the way?
Well, Yeah, good questions. Number one, I'm a little uncomfortable using masculinity or masculine things as a way of defining courage or strength or anything.
I got you. I got you.
But that said, I think we're stuck with him, and we've got what we've got. Whether this is a failure of Biden or whether I mean, politically, it's a disaster to replace a senior cabinet official, particularly the #1 law enforcement officer in the country. So I fully expect Merrick Garland is going to stick around. And unfortunately, there's no way to really lobby him, other than, I suppose, trying to influence public opinion. Maybe there's some attention being paid to that. But, at least we got Jack Smith out of the deal. I'll take that. But, Cliff, I share your concern. And I've complained about Merrick Garland many times. Yeah. Thanks for the call. Yeah, good talking to you. Lloyd in Framingham, Massachusetts. Hey, Lloyd, what's on your mind today?
How you doing? I'm 67 years old, and the way I celebrate Martin Luther King is knowing that if he was alive today, he would be against the massacre and genocide in Gaza.
I'm with you.
He would be against it hands down, and he would be speaking about it every single day.
Yeah, I believe you're absolutely right, and certainly his history with regard to the Vietnam War would indicate that.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, Lloyd, thank you. Your comment is noted. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I want to talk about Trump's eligibility on the ballot in Colorado, but let me jump off with his attorney's absurd pleas of immunity before the D.C. Circuit Court. And what disturbs me about that is the judges were actually taking the bait. Here's what I mean. The attorney was quoting Article 1, Section 3 about it's generally about impeachment. Here's what it says. It says, judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law.
Correct.
That's any federal official.
That's right, including the president.
That does not mention which federal officials, the president, vice, anybody. And this occurred to me because I thought there have been 20 impeachments of federal officials and 8 removals. All of the 8 removals were of federal judges. Now, the judges in the D.C. Circuit were asking, so if SEAL Team 6, if he ordered SEAL Team 6 to murder one of his opponents, is that immunity? Yes, if he wasn't removed from office. But this is not what Article 1 is talking about. It doesn't have anything to do with the immunity of the party.
Right.
This is about the general. But so they asked him that, by the way, the members of SEAL Team 6 would be open to indictment and prosecution for crimes under the Nuremberg standards. And by the way, Lieutenant Calley was prosecuted for the massacre in Vietnam at My Lai. So I don't see how you can say the SEAL Team 6 would be liable for prosecution, but not the president. But
were Trump's attorneys arguing that Article 2 deals with the executive branch and Article 1 deals with Congress? Therefore, this impeachment clause only references Congress? It would be a pretty thin argument, but
that's what I'm saying. This refers to impeachment in general. So
that's what I thought.
Article 2, Section 4 says this, and this is where he gets convicted. And I'm not surprised the judges didn't do this. The president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Right.
Okay. And then they're subject to Article 1, Section 3. They're open to indictment and prosecution once removed from office. Just like so. And by the way, this one says here, the president, vice president, and all civil officers. So remember when Trump was trying to argue the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to him because he's not an officer of the United States?
Right.
This says that he is.
Right.
In other words, the president and vice president and all civil officers, we read this under the Latin, nociter associatus, which is we know it by its associates, the first two examples are prime examples of civil office.
Well, I think that what John, what was his last name? His lawyer was arguing was that the word "and" there is a separator, essentially, which differentiates. You know, if I were to say, you know, Paul and Susie are going to the movie, you'd get it that these are two separate people. And so, you know, he's saying, you know, the president, the vice president, and federal officers. Well, the president and vice president must not be federal officers. Is that not the core of his argument?
Wait a minute. It depends on where you put the comma.
Yeah, I guess.
The comma is the president, comma, vice president, and. In other words, there is no comma between vice president and. So it's inclusive. The president, vice president, and all civil officers. In other words, the first two examples are inclusive under nociter associatus.
Right.
That's the way you would read that. Tom, I'm not a federal judge. I'm not even a bar-certified lawyer. I am just a well-studied layman of the law, and I can put this together.
Yeah.
But here's the point. The next thing that's going to happen here is when Trump's ballot eligibility comes up in Colorado, there's only two questions that the court should be asking, is the state of Colorado within its powers to exclude a party from a ballot? And the answer is obviously yes.
Right.
The yes answer is because they could exclude a party if they were not, say, 35 years old and 14 years of citizen of the United States, either or of those, or of any of the other qualifications. And it would be done under the same civil procedure with a preponderance of the evidence being the standard for the settling the case.
Right.
And the 14th Amendment, they're within their powers, which they did, and Donald Trump need not be a party to the case because he's not being charged. He's, as an individual, not being charged. The other question is, and this is why the ultimate answer is this, the court should not make it, they should take the case, but they should not rule because it's a political question, and the most important of the 6 criteria for that is there another power that can make a decision on this before the court? And that the 14th Amendment, Section 3 says Congress may remove this disability with a 2/3 majority in each house.
Correct.
Congress hasn't acted. Why not? I haven't even heard one Republican mention it.
Right.
And so if Congress does not act, they are also sending a message to the court that says maybe we don't think the disability should be removed.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing is,
go ahead.
Yeah. The New York Times got it wrong. It's saying that the 14th Amendment says only Congress can remove this disability. No, the 14th Amendment only says that Congress can remove the disability, which means that other powers may be able to remove it too. In other words, a state could remove the disability. For instance, it's not dependent on Jack Smith or Donald Trump being criminally indicted and convicted, because a conviction in one jurisdiction does not necessarily transfer to another jurisdiction, and the state of Colorado, for example, would have to go through the same process and just use that conviction as evidence in the civil case to say, yeah, we're not going to have him on the ballot. But the states could also remove the disability and say, no, it doesn't matter that he was convicted. He can run from jail, as Eugene Debs did in 1912 and as Matthew Lyon did in 1798.
Don't you think the appeals court is going to point all this stuff out in their decision?
I hope so. I'm doing it, Tom.
I do too. It's so self-evident. Paul, thank you for the call. Spot on. Almost 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Picking up your calls here on this frigid winter day, Martin Luther King Day. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jay in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Jay, what's up?
Hey, I completely agree with you on global warming and all those effects, but I think there's one other factor that we're missing, and they've known about it for 22 to 23 years. The tilt of the Earth is going the 23-degree tilt, which I've heard puts the equator in Chicago, and as best I could do with a protractor, I figured out Baltimore. Does that mean our toilets are going to run backwards? That's pretty much all I got.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of the arguments that the climate deniers make is that, you know, the orbit of the Earth varies over time, and this is what accounts for the difference between ice ages and not ice ages, right? And there is truth to that. The problem is that those changes in the Earth's orbital plane happen over thousand-year periods rather than over the 150 years or so that we've been heating up our planet with all these atmospheric gases.
It could be an effect to our current situation, though. That's all it's
No,
pointing at.
it's not. It is. Okay. This is all happening way too fast for geological timescales.
Yeah, it's not helping.
No, it's definitely not.
Anyway.
Okay, Jake, excellent point. Thank you. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm going to continue the conversation here a bit, even though I was planning on talking about Iowans. But I read somebody by the name of Kaufman, my girlfriend gave this to me for Christmas, gave me this field atlas of the California coast. And there's some information about the LA basin in there regarding global warming. In the past let's just say since 1900. Since 1900, on any given day during the whole year, the average temperature in the Los Angeles basin has moved up 4 degrees Fahrenheit.
4?
So 4 degrees Fahrenheit.
Whoa.
Yeah. So let's just say in 1900, on a typical day in January, early January, it would have been maybe like 61 degrees as a daytime high. Now it's add 4 degrees, so it's 65.
Right.
And also, I mean, this guy did some math. He did some research. By the end of this century in the LA basin in July, and, we have to take into account that, they're next to the Pacific Ocean there. And even Pasadena can get marine layer on summer mornings, even that far inland, that you're going to have an average high in the LA basin by, say, 2085 of 95 degrees. When now it's maybe, upper 70s.
Which means the desertification and the wildfires are going to get worse and worse and worse in Southern California.
Yeah, and also here's another thing. The average amount of marine layer, and you guys get marine layer up there in Oregon in the summer as well. Yep. The average time when there's marine layer during the summer on any given day is now 3 hours less than what it was 100
because it's being burned off by
100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting burned off a lot quicker.
Amazing. Okay, Dennis, I did not know that. Thank you. I'll take your word for it. 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. 49 minutes past the hour. Greg in Gastonia, North Carolina. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind today?
Tom, whenever you bring up a talk about a Republican politician that's had, let's just call it marital issues, you like to bring that to the forefront. Does that also include Dr. King?
I don't know.
He had him just as well.
I don't know what you're talking about, Greg.
Because David Garrow, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, studied recently released FBI memos, and King had 40 to 45 mistresses, some of which he treated pretty shabbily too.
I would be surprised by those kind of numbers, but I would guess that probably Jack Kennedy had at least that many. That does not, infidelity is, half of all married people, participate in extramarital relationships. That does not diminish.
That's not me. Not me.
Well, God bless you, Greg. You're a righteous man, but that does not diminish anybody's message, frankly, in my mind. David in San Antonio. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Good. Hey, I just got a quick reminder for you. I have an opinion, and I have a question for you real quick because I'm driving over the road. In 2006, I gave you a call, And I told you that we were going to lose our democracy in 20 years. And it seems like if we elect Trump, then I'm going to be a year early.
Okay.
The statement I want to make is I just honestly believe that Merrick Garland was just the wrong person for the wrong time because he always said that he didn't want to be the first person to indict a former president. Well, why would you take this job after the insurrection did?
I didn't know that he ever said that.
Oh yeah, that's what the word that was going around.
Yeah, the word going around. I'm not buying it, David. Although he did, fiddle around or whatever, screw around for the first 2 years. I mean, it's just it's very unfortunate. I don't know. There's nothing, to the best of my knowledge, there's not a lot we can do about this right now, other than learn a lesson from it, for the future. David, thank you for the call. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You were talking about the Iowa caucus and how brutally cold it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's cold a bit here in New York City, but not taking away of your scientific explanation, let alone actual why it's so cold. I want to add also, look who's in Iowa right now running for the presidency. Most notably, the person that's the front row who happens to be the coldest individual that I have ever known in my almost 57 years of living that's, running for president. And then the stuff that they pulled.
So you're saying that Trump's frozen heart is freezing Iowa?
I'm saying that as a joke, as also as one of those things that make you go, And it ain't just him, it's DeSantis as well. Nikki Haley, it doesn't have it all together either, because of her back and forth and her off the wall and quite disrespectful, hurting comments. But when Trump's going to say that he has the authority, he has the right to assassinate his political enemies, he has the right to assassinate anyone that opposes him, that really eats up inside my heart, because I stand for truth, I stand for justice, I stand for good, and I never, ever support evil of any kind.
Yeah.
No evil, no crime, no terrorism, all that befits under Trump, and I will not stop speaking the truth. And then to think that guy is going to put a target on my back, as well as everyone else that's standing for democracy, this is what we're facing here. Democracy is on the ballot, as well as our very own lives and safety.
Yeah, I think what Trump was arguing in court is that he intends to do exactly what Hitler did on the Night of the Long Knives, which was when basically the Nazis, Hitler's SS, his personal Praetorian Guard, as it were, assassinated a whole bunch of his political enemies, including those within his own party. So, I think people need to take this really seriously. Michael, thank you for the call. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta. Maybe your ears were ringing earlier?
They were.
Or burning, I guess is the phrase. Anyhow, what's up?
Yeah, well, listen, and first of all, I appreciate you mentioning the article. I appreciate that. But I wanted to talk to you actually real quickly about an article that you wrote a few days ago, and it was called The Snowflaking of White Privilege.
I was going to bring that up, if I can just jump in real quick, because we only have a minute and a half. You replied saying one of the top white privileges is getting to define what white privilege is, and obviously I was defining, I was putting my own definition of it in there. What's yours?
Mm-hmm. Well, no. That's a long answer, Tom.
Okay.
But let me just say that part of white privilege is being able to define what white privilege is.
Exactly.
White privilege is so many things, and people get confused with racism and white privilege. They're very different things. You take, for instance, Clarence Thomas, who is clearly a white supremacist, even though he's a black man in the United States. But he's a white supremacist, but he doesn't enjoy white privilege. If Clarence Thomas takes off, ironically, his black robe and goes into the Target, he's going to get followed around like every other black person does, to see if he's stealing something. So these are very different things, but it was an astonishing article, and I want to thank you for having the courage to write it and address it. Getting to Dr. King, he said three words that resonate with me, and he said difficult days ahead. I know you're aware that last week there was a young man, 26 years old, picked up in Florida, who had talked about a high-scoring event, a high-scoring Saints event. High-scoring is what white supremacists use for mass casualty events, mass shootings, and that they become saints. And this guy was a supporter of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's term started with violence. You remember Charlottesville. Yep. It ended with violence on January 6th. Yep. Donald Trump, we've got difficult days ahead. There's no doubt about it. I just wanted to say that to you. And lastly, I wanted to mention to you that as we celebrate Martin King Jr.'s birthday today, 5 weeks from now will be not a celebration, but will mark the assassination of Malcolm X. And many the European American media always wants to pit black men against each other. Actually, these two men were very fond of each other. They weren't very different, and actually started to intersect at the time of their brutal assassinations. Yeah. Martin King, the only difference was Martin Luther King was trying to appeal to the white man's heart. Malcolm X was trying to appeal to the black man's mind.
That's a brilliant analysis. I love the way your mind works, and it's one of the reasons I enjoy reading your newsletter over on Substack, Kenyatta. Thank you so much. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, good talking to you. We'll be right back. It's we're hitting the top of the hour. On the other side of this break, Trump's closing pitch to Iowa. Tell you about that. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our quote for the day from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education, and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. Bill O'Reilly is outraged, I'm telling you, that the Escambia County School District in Florida, following on the law that Ron DeSantis signed in March of 2022, giving anybody the right to challenge books in libraries and public schools, and then they have to be pulled, canceled 2 of his books, Killing Jesus and Killing Reagan. I was about to say I don't have a problem with O'Reilly's books being canceled, but actually I do. You know, it's I don't think that they're great contributions to the literature, you know, to the canon of great American literature, but O'Reilly's quite freaked out about this, that his book got canceled. Oh my God. What's good for the goose is not good for the gander. Cancel all those books about black people and queer people, but me, Bill O'Reilly, no. He says, when DeSantis signed the book law, I supported it. So now the law needs to be tightened up. Right. Oh, geez, hypocrisy. You know no bounds. All right, Donald Trump is making his final pitch to Republicans. He's in Iowa right now doing his song and dance. Today is the caucuses. And he's telling people, you know, even if you die, get out on the roads and get out there and caucus for me. Me. He says these caucuses are your personal choice to score the... actually, before I read this to you, this is the perfect distillation of Donald Trump's mind. And frankly, now that virtually the entire Republican Party is behind him, and, you know, old line, just kind of classic Republicans, you know, like Joe Scarborough, have left the party, I think you could safely say this is a distillation of what has become the GOP. And that is that, you know, they're not grounded in optimism. They're not grounded in hope. They're not grounded in faith. They're not grounded in any of those positive attributes that Ronald Reagan at least pretended to back in 1980. They're grounded in, well, here's the quote. These caucuses are your personal choice to score the ultimate victory over all the liars, cheaters, thugs, perverts, frauds, crooks, freaks, creeps, and other quite nice people, Trump told the audience. The Washington swamp has done everything in its power to take away your voice, but tomorrow is your time to turn on them and to speak your mind and vote. He also said that he knew that my supporters will walk on glass for me. Right. He went on to say, you can't sit home. If you're sick as a dog, you say, darling, I got to make it. Even if you vote and then pass away, it's worth it. Now, I get it. That was more tongue-in-cheek. But you know, he's trying to get 50%. Now, if he was only up against one other person, there's a possibility he would lose. He said, let's see if we can get to 50%. The previous record for a margin of victory was Bob Dole's 13-point win over Pat Robertson back in 1988. But the last poll, the Des Moines Register NBC poll, just that went out yesterday, I guess, found that nearly half of those who will be attending the caucuses will be there for Trump, 20% for Haley and 16% for DeSantis. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, you know, the governor of the state, and thus arguably the head of the Republican Party for the state, is out stumping for DeSantis, which I find interesting. I don't know if she's going to, you know, start, you know, basically telling the truth about what's going on with Trump, or if it's just going to be, oh, you know, Ron DeSantis, he's a good guy. Let's all get out there. The other, I think, big story in the news that is getting short shrift is another indication of the psychopathology that has infected the Republican Party, or that Donald Trump has given the psychopaths who have made the GOP their home the freedom to express. And in this case, the psychopath I'm talking about, and I really truly believe he is is Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas. What kind of person puts razor wire, not just in the river, but a little bit underwater so you don't quite see it until you've been slashed open by it? What kind of person sends the two different Texas militia groups, the Texas National Guard and the Texas Military Department, sends them down there to prevent Border Patrol officers from rescuing people who are drowning? This happened over the weekend. A young mother and her 2 children were trying to cross the Rio Grande and got tangled up in Abbott's wire or something close to it, as far as I can tell, and drowned. And if the news reports are accurate, now Greg Abbott is saying that they're not, but the media seems to be fairly united on this. If the news reports are accurate, the Texas National Guard and the Texas Military Department watched as this young woman and her 2 young children died, trying to get to the United States, trying to either escape something horrible or come to something better. We have right now an aging population in the United States. We actually need immigrants. We need more people. Or I realize that you can generate a debate around that word need, but it's not a bad thing that people are coming in. What's bad about it is that they're coming in ways that are disorganized and chaotic, and that Greg Abbott is shipping them into very specific places like Chicago. And that's creating a crisis. It's not, frankly, the number of people coming across. The number of people coming across is not all that substantially different from previous times. I mean, there's been kind of steady flow of migrants into the United States throughout history. But on December 18th, just in time for Christmas, Greg Abbott signed SB 4, which says that he and his state are going to take over patrolling the border of the United States of America, a function that under the Constitution is given exclusively to the federal government and under federal law. And the Texas Republicans are now saying, we're hopeful. We realize this is illegal and unconstitutional, and we're hopeful that this gets taken all the way to the Supreme Court, where we think that the 3 new right-wing whack jobs that Donald Trump put on the court will rule in our favor. We'll see. But the Department of Justice on January 3rd of this year filed a lawsuit against Texas. And in their lawsuit, they say Texas cannot run its own immigration system. Its efforts through SB 4 intrude on the federal government's exclusive authority to regulate the entry and removal of non-citizens, frustrate the United States immigration operations and proceedings, and interfere with U.S. foreign relations. But the bottom line is here, the Biden administration is asking for $14 billion from Congress to hire more Border Patrol agents, to strengthen the border barriers, essentially, the wall, a non-lethal wall, and to hire more immigration judges so that people can be adjudicated, so their cases can be determined whether they can stay in the United States or whether they have to go back to wherever they came from. And Republicans in Congress are presenting a united front against that. A fact that is almost never mentioned in these media stories about what's going on the border and immigration and all this kind of thing. But the reason why is quite obvious. The Republicans think that this is the issue that they're going to win the election in 2024 on. They want to make sure that the crisis at the border continues. Now, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, who is on the receiving end of, Texas has spent $100 million so far of taxpayer dollars. Greg Abbott has spent $100 million taxpayer dollars busing and flying immigrants to blue cities, particularly Chicago and New York. And Pritzker's letter said that it's to Abbott. He said, you are choosing to sow chaos in an attempt to score political points. Sending asylum seekers from Texas to the upper Midwest in the middle of winter, with many without coats, even without shoes to protect them from the snow, to a city whose shelters are already overfilled with the migrants that you sent here. He said, while action is pending at the federal level, I plead with you for mercy for the thousands of people who are powerless to speak for themselves. Now, see, here's the problem. J.B. Pritzker thinks that Greg Abbott is capable of mercy. He's not. He's a psychopath. J.B. Pritzker goes on to say, we are asking you to help prevent additional deaths. Well, I'm sorry, J.B., or Governor Pritzker, but Greg Abbott likes people dying. That's why you put razor wire out. J.D. Pritzker goes on to say, we should be able to come together in a bipartisan fashion to urge Congress to act. But right now, we're talking about human beings and their survival. I hope we can at least agree on saving lives right now. And Abbott's response, essentially, he said this before Pritzker sent the letter, but essentially this is all we're hearing from him. He said, he was on the Dana Loesch show, and he said, quote, the only thing that we're not doing is we're not shooting people who come across the border, because, of course, the Biden administration would charge us with murder. In other words, he's not saying that we're not shooting people because that would be wrong. He's not saying we're not shooting people because that would be brutal, inhumane, cruel, violent. I mean, the only country in the world that I know of that's doing that right now is Saudi Arabia. They're shooting people who are trying to immigrate into, who are trying to cross their borders into Saudi Arabia from Yemen. But he's saying, you know, we're not going to shoot them because we don't want to be charged with murder. This is one sick and twisted individual. And again, just like Donald Trump, tells you everything you need to know about today's Republican Party. You know, the fact that he is the governor and he's continuing to be the governor. So, anyhow, wait a minute. Judge Eileen Cannon's husband worked for a mob boss in New York connected to Donald Trump? Really? I don't know. I want to run this by you and see what you know about this. I find it fascinating. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. And welcome back. And let's see here. Tom in Irvine, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yep, it's upper 50s and partly cloudy here in Irvine, and we'll be getting rain at the end of the week. And I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness between Kenyatta and Paul from Woodinville, Washington, and Dennis from Aptos.
Yeah, that's some good callers.
But the reason I'm calling is I've been hearing every now and then right-wingers calling for women to lose the right to vote.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to point out that the first three elections that women were able to vote in 1920 was Warren Harding, a Republican, Calvin Coolidge in 1924, a pro-business Republican, and Herbert Hoover in 1928, a pro-business Republican.
That's an interesting point. It would be interesting. I doubt they were doing polling back then, but it would be interesting to find out, A, how many women actually voted, because that was back in the era when, you know, it was legal for husbands to beat their wives, and you know, so there may have been many women who just were not allowed to vote by, you know, by their own husbands. And if they did vote, you know, if some significant percentage of women did vote in those elections, how their votes went.
Yeah.
I wonder if women's rights were even an issue back then, you know, in those elections. Like, let's repeal the 19th Amendment. I don't know.
Well, I think, you know, the popular vote numbers, I think, significantly went up, you know, starting in 1920 because women were voting. But my point is that whether they, you know, I'm sure they voted like in the same percentages, you know, with every other demographic, and that, you know, women having the right to vote does not disadvantage or advantage either party, at least back then.
Yeah. Well, and white women are still disproportionately, you know, the majority of white women are still voting for Republicans. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
it's a slightly smaller number than white men, but Lyndon Johnson was the last Democrat to actually win the white vote in the United States at the popular level. Yeah, interesting point. Tom, thank you. Thanks for the call. Mike in Columbia, Missouri. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Happy MLK Day.
Thank you.
You know, I'm an agnostic, and I've had trouble with the concepts of good and evil existing throughout the universe and on Earth, but particularly with Homo sapiens. But I do think a really good example of evil is Loser Donnie. And before you were talking about the governor of Texas, I'll take your response up there.
You think a good example of evil is what?
Loser Donnie, or Pigface. That's what I call Trump.
Oh, Trump.
And
okay.
And the governor of the Lone Star State.
Yeah. So yeah. I've never had a good understanding or whatever the proper word is of exactly what evil is. You know, it's obviously there are some people who are very, very badly damaged, and I view Donald Trump as one of those people. His mother didn't want him. His father didn't like him. You know, he was just damaged. I'm skeptical of evil as an intrinsic characteristic, but evil acts come out of that damage, and that's where I see it. But you know, but I'm a bleeding heart liberal. Mike, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, you know, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at hartmannreport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour, and this thing about Eileen Cannon is absolutely weird, and I've not been able to find any specific corroboration for it. So I'm putting this out not as an assertion, but as a question. Capital Hunters on Twitter, CAPITOL Hunters, at Capital Hunters on Twitter, has this thread that I actually retweeted last night. If you want to easily find it, you can find it in my timeline, or X or whatever you call it. That starts out, now that Trump has flashed a New York Mafia pal, Donald Trump said on his not-infested social media site, he said, "Thank you to Sammy the Bull. I hope Judges Engoron and Kaplan see this. We need fairness, strength, and honesty in our New York courts. We don't have it now." And it says, flashback, former Gambino crime family underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano says Donald Trump is incorruptible. All right. So Donald Trump gets endorsed by a murderous mafia kingpin, and he thanks him in public. Hey, thank you, Sammy the Bull. So Capital Hunter says, now that Trump has flashed a New York Mafia pal, murderer Sammy Gravino of the Gambino family, to threaten Judge Engoron, is it finally time to mention that Trump's New York mob ties also touch his friendly judge, Eileen Cannon, Her husband worked for John Rosati of the Colombo family. Trump palled around with Colombo buddies John Rosati and John Staluppi in the 80s. Staluppi went into business with Trump in '88. Cannon's husband worked for Rosati later, 2011 through 2014. She's not required to recuse, but she should have. He points out that, or they point out that Cannon's husband seems to agree it looks unseemly since he wiped his LinkedIn in 2022 when Cannon got a high-profile Trump case. He was a senior executive at Rosati's Burger Fi, a hamburger business oddly with branches in Saudi Arabia. So Rosati kind of went legitimate and started this burger chain, and Cannon's husband was a senior executive there, which doesn't mean that he's mobbed up necessarily. It doesn't mean that, it could mean nothing at all. Or it could be just really weird. But I Googled this, and I couldn't find anything basically other than this Twitter thread. But the Twitter thread has all these specific, visuals of details of it. Have you heard anything about this? What's going on with this? And is it even a thing? I honestly don't know. But I thought I'd put it on your dashboard and see what y'all have to say.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 27 minutes past the hour. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the preciousness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at hartmannreport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here, Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Let me tell you how I read the D.C. court decision regarding Trump's immunity claim. I think they're going to rule against him because Trump making the claim that he has absolute immunity, this is basically saying that he's a dictator or he's a king.
Right, he's above the law.
He can do whatever he wants.
Right.
Correct. The court is not going to rule like that. They're going to rule against him. And when he goes to the Supreme Court, the way that I read the Supreme Court is like this. With the exception of Clarence Thomas, I think they're going to also rule against him, because the Supreme Court has basically, if you look historically how this radical Supreme Court has been ruling, they have been making terrible rulings when it comes to LGBTQ or abortion issues. However, if you look at the history of Trump, they have ruled consistently against him.
Yeah.
I think he's going to lose in both courts, and that's what I wanted to say.
I agree with your analysis.
Yeah, and one last thing is, I am very, very upset about this guy Trump being not being in jail. What he's been doing lately, openly on TV, threatening judges, prosecutors, and other people, judges receiving bomb threats. This man is a danger and a menace to society. He should be in jail by now.
I agree.
It is unbelievable to me that he's getting away with all of this. But anyway, those are my thoughts for the day. Thank you, Trump.
Yeah, it's
Tom.
just, you know, it's America. I mean, when was the last time that a billionaire went to jail in America? It just doesn't happen. Alfredo, thank you. Spot on. I'm with you. Mary in St. George, Utah. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Well, hello, Tom. I heard Dr. King speak in person in 1967.
Oh, my.
I was in nursing school in Toledo, Ohio. He was the most impressive speaker I have ever heard. Yet the news shows never presented him in his true light.
And how is that? What should they be doing?
Well, it was ironic that when I told my parents that I did that, they absolutely had a fit because they saw Dr. King as a radical. And it was the way the news portrayed him at the time.
Yeah, I get it. That's a fascinating story, Mary. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's and very nice to hear from you, and happy MLK Day. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. Before I get to my main point, just a quick one that came across my phone not long ago. Attorney Joe Tacopina has completely withdrawn from representing Trump.
In which case?
He told ABC, he says, quote to ABC News, "I withdraw on all matters."
So which case was Tacopina defending Trump on?
I think he was involved in the case before Judge Engoron, but he was representing him to a greater or lesser extent, either as the first chair or second chair on a number of other cases. But this article from ABC News says that he's completely severed himself from Trump.
Any idea why?
Doesn't say. It's very closed-mouthed. He wouldn't answer questions about that.
Yeah.
The main reason I called is this. The brave school principal from Perry, Iowa, that put himself in harm's way to protect and try to save his students during the recent heinous shooting that had died of his wounds yesterday.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if the Iowa Republicans, when they meet tonight, if he'll be in their thoughts and prayers. I wonder if they'll have a moment of silence for the brave principal, or even say a group prayer for him. My guess is they won't.
Yeah,
and
all four of the Republican candidates are supportive of the NRA and more guns, more guns, more guns.
Yeah, and it's this good, brave man gave his life for his kids.
Yeah.
And another brave man who gave his life for his country, Dr. Martin Luther King, who died for his country as surely as any serviceman who died in combat. Today is his national holiday, and not only his national holiday, but it's his actual birthday. And you would think that the Republican state government and the Republican Party in Iowa would have the decency to move their cuckoo caucuses to tomorrow, delay it one day, just so that they're not treading on the holiday of a great American.
Oh, au contraire, George. This is their way of saying that it's of little consequence to them.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is their way of spitting on his reputation, his memory, and his grave. And I'm convinced more than ever that, well, it began with Nixon and the Southern Strategy. The R in Republican stands for racism, and that's what that party is. It's racist to the core.
Yeah, I'm with you. As I pointed out at the beginning of the program, I don't know if you caught it, but there is a caucus or a group in Iowa of Republicans of color, Black Republicans, Hispanic Republicans, all non-white Republicans welcome, basically Native Americans, Asians, and it's real, and it's got members. And they have invited all four of the candidates, all of the major candidates, Ramaswamy and Haley and DeSantis and Trump, to come speak to them, and none of those four have shown up, as far as I can tell, even once to address, Republicans of color. So, it's...
Well, the optics would be bad. They wouldn't want to be photographed or videoed with a group like that.
Well, and not only that, they wouldn't know what to say.
By their opponent.
I mean, what are you going to say? Yes, we've opposed the Civil Rights Act ever since 1965, and we will die opposing, or 64. Yeah, I get it. George, excellent point. Thank you very much for that. Ruth in West Los Angeles. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Well, first of all, every single time I listen to you, I learn something. It's phenomenal.
Well, thank you.
So anyway, but I'll make my point in a second. First of all, thank you for mentioning the business about Eileen Cannon's husband. It wouldn't surprise me. Also about Abbott, any further than his appointee, Ken Paxton, who would rather see a woman die than, give birth to a fetus that's not
another
going
psychopath.
to. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, thank you so much for reading that part of the nuclear regulator. That's the thing that hit me today because I'm from KPFK, and we have a show called Solartopia that deals with nuclear issues, so I will definitely pass that along. The main reason to call was to say that the Attorney General, whether it makes any difference or not, Merrick Garland, does have a general line in New York for the Attorney General's office. So you can call in and make a comment. Whether it gets to him or not, or whether he listens to it, is a whole other thing. But it is there, and I've called it. And the number is 202-353-1555.
I'm sure that there's an office in D.C. as well.
Okay, that may be that. I may have done that just to make sure that it got to him, but that's a good point too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Ruth.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for your kind words. Michael in Bakersfield, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, is this me?
Yeah, you're on the air, Michael. What's up?
Hey, I'm actually in Asheville. My father was from Asheville. He became like a journalist, and he was one of the editors of Time Life. And he told me shortly before my dad died in '89 that the editors would lunch with people like JFK and Martin Luther King at Ho Ho's Chinese restaurant in Manhattan. And he was having lunch with them. And the I Had a Dream speech, he said, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I went to a Chinese restaurant, and he said, here we are, grandsons of slaveholders and the slaves, breaking bread in the spirit of brotherhood. He said that to King a week before King put in the speech.
Oh, interesting. So that's it. Yeah. You just never know where things come from, where seeds are planted. Michael, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. 45 minutes past the hour. I'm picking up your phone calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option, and we'll be back with your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
I'll be right back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con in conservative. Stay with us. And welcome back. Monica in Chirino, Texas. Hey, Monica, what's on your mind today?
Hey, that Twitter story regarding Judge Cannon's husband is amazing, if it's true, right?
Well, maybe. I mean, you know, the mob bosses can start legitimate businesses, and they can hire legitimate business people to run them, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're part of the mob. You know, I mean, he might be completely... It's just that it looks bad. She should have recused herself, if you know, for that, if nothing else.
Well, what gets me, Jack Smith ought to be able to move that to a different court, right?
Maybe. I don't, you know, according to the thread from Capitol Hunters, this is not an automatic recusal. This is not a close enough association that it could force a recusal. And odds are it's a completely innocent thing. The thing that's got people going, huh, is that he scrubbed it off his LinkedIn bio.
Oh, my God. Let me run something by you real quick if you've got a minute.
Sure.
I'm 80 years old. I live in Nacogdoches County in Texas. And a fracking company has ruined my property. And I can't afford to clean it up. But the bottom line is, none of the attorneys that I've talked to date want to take on the shale cowboys. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I'm hoping that somebody hears this and will get the intestinal fortitude to help an old woman.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay, Monica, let me just make a quick note here of your phone number, so if somebody calls and says they want to help, I can pass it along. Is that all right with you?
That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. I love your broadcast and listen every day.
Thanks. And your phone number correctly ends with 0740, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I've got the right number. Okay, I've got it. Good luck, Monica. And thank you for the call. Kathleen in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Kathleen, what's on your mind today?
Actually, I'm in Federal Way, but close enough.
Okay, I'll change that.
I was born in 1963, even though I sound like I'm 12. But I grew up about a mile north of the Edmonds Ferry Dock. Mm-hmm. And in the time of my youth, we had ditches, and we had ponds and streams and creeks running through all of our neighborhoods. And then, you know, by the 70s, all that water was underground. A lot more development happened, a lot more stuff paved over, sidewalks. So the ditches were put underground. And I think the global warming is that we don't have the absorber of the water on the surface of the earth to absorb the temperature changes.
Because we've destroyed so much of the vegetation, you mean?
No, I'm talking about water. That when the temperatures go up, the water will absorb that heat and release it at night. So there isn't the temperature changes from day and night time. In the mornings in Edmonds, we'd always have foggy weather because that water was evaporating after the sun started shining on it. That early morning sun is a drying kind of weather.
Right.
And that's what evaporates the water during the night. The same thing with the Lake Washington being dropped several feet when they put in the lock. I mean, everywhere where we're doing the terraforming, it changes the water, which changes our temperature.
Oh, sure. I mean, this is what led to the Dust Bowl, and it's how FDR reversed it by planting all those trees. Interesting. Kathleen, thank you. Interesting. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. It's 9 minutes before the hour. We're picking up your calls here. Marie in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Marie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just wanted to call out for MLK Day. Dr. King, everybody tends to look to two speeches, the letter from a Birmingham jail and his I Have a Dream speech.
Right.
I think the speech that is much more significant and relevant to our current times is the Where Do We Go From Here speech.
Yeah, that's the one Kenyatta
speech,
was quoting this morning.
Yes, that's the speech that really, it was when he was not so much pivoting, but he was beginning to draw the dots, pulling the dots together in terms of how racism impacts economics and how economically and environmentally the oppressed were experiencing what essentially it's not limited to the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
When he talked about you cannot murder. All you're doing is ratcheting up whatever, that conflict is about. And that was, I believe, a mild call out to the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And how, what we were doing there made no sense. It wasn't going to change what was happening.
Well, and also, racial violence in the United States.
Exactly. So I just wanted to call that out. And actually, Dr. King's daughter, Bernice, wrote a book about her father's speech. Great book. So I would
about the Where Do We Go From Here speech?
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, she was tweeting this morning about her father. It's very poignant. Well, thank you for that, Marie. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Rick in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, well, you mentioned about the mob and politics. I mean, that goes way back. I mean, anything to do with power or money, there's corruption, which basically what you call a mob. I mean, what the billionaire crowd has turned our government into is they're the mob. They're using their money and influence to corrupt our government. And until we get money out of our government, the mob is basically running it. The money is corrupting our government and using it to divide people. That's the true, corruption. I mean, people got, mob, that's the wrong word. People got to start getting hip to corruption and how money's corrupting our politics.
I think people are well aware of it. I think that's why, Trump's use of the phrase, the D.C. swamp resonates with people. People know that the majority of Americans want inexpensive health care. The majority of Americans want to be able to send their kids to college without going broke or going into debt. The majority of Americans want clean air and water. The majority of Americans don't want cancer-causing chemicals in our food supply. The majority, I could go on, right? And that none of those things happen because Congress has been bought off. And Congress has been bought off because 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court legalized it.
Well, the money. I mean, it's like a circulatory thing. I mean, they got their taxes all cut, and they have all this money to buy politicians. Where back when money wasn't in politics and they were taxed fairly, they didn't have all this money to corrupt our government. Well, now they not only corrupting our government, and our government's giving them more money. They get us into wars so that they can profit. I mean, it's just the corruption is so prevalent. People got to realize, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, if we don't get money out of politics,
we're toast.
We're going to have an oligarchy, plain and simple, because they're buying it.
Yep, your point is well made, Rick. Thank you. Rich in Cedro Willie, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Despair is not an answer, you say. We got to bleed through on my headphone. I don't know I can't hear you.
It might be that you've got an incoming call, Rick. If you've got a beep, it's probably calling.
No, it's like from your advertisement or from another channel. I'm not sure, but anyway, I'll try to plow through this.
Rich?
Hello.
Yeah, I'm still here.
I'm sorry. I can't get through this. It's like getting too loud. I'll try another day.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Thanks, Rich. Chris in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Hi, Mr. Hartman. Thank you for accepting my call. Shout out to, I think his name is Kenyatta.
Yeah.
From California.
Yeah.
Great guy. I'm actually, I'm originally from Alabama. I want to do another shout out to Martin Luther King's birthday. And I was actually wanted to make a quick statement. Anyway, my great uncle was part of the second Selma to Montgomery March. And he used to tell me stories about, I don't want to get in. I think I talked about it last time. But anyway, messaging for the Democratic Party. Wow. we need to do a lot.
I agree.
Some things are so simplistic. Some things are so easy to say. Just say, like I guess what was the gentleman? I think his name was Rudy Giuliani.
Mm-hmm.
That claimed election fraud, but when he went to Port of Court and lost his case, why he could have just simply said, "I have evidence, and everything I said about these two women, which was true." He would have got off the case. And Fox, the verdict was found. I think he had to pay a deficit. I think it was almost $900 million.
Yeah.
And why can't they just say we have proof?
The liars are paying up here. Chris, I'm sorry, I'm out of time, but thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people, and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854, and just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. So what's up with the Fed? The Federal Reserve. This is one of those kind of falls into the category of obscure questions that most people don't even wonder about, but it could have a huge impact on your life. The Fed responded to the 2020 crash, essentially, which was provoked by, obviously, COVID worldwide. The Fed responded to that by doing two things. Number one, they dropped interest rates down to zero. I mean, functionally, in some cases, arguably even negative interest rates. They were basically giving banks all the money they wanted. They didn't want to risk a repeat of what happened in 2008, during the Bush crash. And then secondly, what they did is they started buying bonds. People were not, bonds are long-term investments. They're debt instruments. And nobody was buying bonds. The bonds were paying so little interest that, they didn't have much value. But companies need to issue bonds. Many of these are corporate bonds, actually, as well as governmental bonds. Governments and corporations need to issue bonds in order to get operating money. And if the bond market collapses, that could be as bad as a stock market collapse. In fact, arguably, it could be worse. It's hard to measure which would be worse, but they're both bad events, right? It's like heart attack or cancer, right? So they had bought up $4.5 trillion worth of Treasury bonds, and also, large quantities of other kinds of bonds. They'd bought trillions of dollars in corporate bonds as well. They have, this was between February 2020 and April of 2022 when they stopped buying bonds. And since April of 2022, they have shrunk that portfolio by $1.3 trillion. In part, some of those bonds simply matured. Others, they just sold place, And the question now, as Matthew Klein writes over at theovershoot.co, is what happens next? Because the Fed really doesn't want to be using buying and selling bonds as a way to control inflation. They'd rather do that by controlling short-term interest rates, which then echo through the economy as home mortgage rates and car loan rates and credit card rates and everything else. So Lori Logan, not the right-wing crazy, but the former president, actually the current president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, who used to be at the New York Fed and was in charge of market operations at the New York Fed, which would include buying and selling bonds, says that the Fed wants to slow down or halt this this balance sheet shrinkage. In other words, they're at the point now, according to her, where they're saying, sitting on $3.5 trillion roughly dollars worth of bonds is a good thing. we're good right now. And yet, nobody's really sure exactly what they're going to do. They bought about $2 trillion worth of bonds between April and May of 2020, and then added another $2.5 trillion between May and April of 2022. And now, and the other thing is that, holding bonds, buying bonds and holding bonds is technically a form of economic stimulus. So the Fed is in this situation where if they start getting rid of these bonds, if they start selling these bonds, shedding these bonds, they run the risk of producing deflation, of reducing inflation, of collapsing the economy. On the other hand, if they hang on to them, they're arguably artificially stimulating the economy. And so they're just, they don't want to deprive the banking system of liquidity, which is one of the things that is available as a result of their holding bonds. So right now, nobody really knows where the Fed is going to go with this, and there's a big debate within the Fed. So I just wanted to put that on your radar screen. For most people, oh, bonds and Fed, it's like, what the hell is that? It's going to have to do with inflation. It's going to have to do with interest rates. It's going to have, but most importantly, it's going to have to do with whether the economy is robust and growing or not. And so pay attention to this. This is something worth keeping an eye on. It's one of those kind of leading indicators. when the Fed takes actions around their bond holdings, you see the impact of that typically months later, sometimes even years later in the real marketplace. So something worth, kind of knowing what's going on. Finally, I have I told you a couple of weeks ago, I started a new Substack for things that don't have to do with politics. And I just post over there once a week. It's called wisdomschool.com, or The Wisdom School. What It Means to Be Human is the title. And the one that I posted on Sunday was, is sauna therapy built into our genes? And this is interesting. Back in the 70s, when Louise and I were youngins and just married, I've been a science geek my whole life. And I read this article in one of these science publications about how, and this was when they were really starting to figure out exactly how fever works. About how suppressing fever actually can slow the rate at which people recover from infections. My recollection, I mean, this was a long time ago, my recollection is they were talking about things like the flu. And so if you take an antipyretic drug, a fever-reducing drug, Advil or aspirin or something like that, it can actually slow down the healing, even though it reduces the side effect of the fever. But fever is the body's way of turning on huge, multi-layered systems that do a whole bunch of different things. And, typically when the body has an infection, it turns on its own fever and does this thing all by itself. But you can turn on fever without an infection and get the benefits of that by simply taking a long, hot bath and getting your pulse actually will tell you what your core temperature is. For roughly every 1 degree of Fahrenheit of body core temperature increase, you'll see about a 10 beat per minute increase in your heartbeat rate. And also, you sweat, you actually sweat out toxins, including heavy metals. It's pretty much the only way your body can get rid of heavy metals is through sweating. These things like lead and cadmium, these poisonous heavy metals that are in our food supply and in the dust we breathe and things like that. So it turns out that sauna is like, this is like this incredibly therapeutic thing. And there's all these different levels at which it works. First off, they go back 10,000 years. They've found, this is the old sweat lodge. Indigenous people, humans for thousands and thousands of years have been building saunas in basically every culture, at least every culture that has winter, but in many cases, every culture all around the world. And so there's that, and the Finns and the Native Americans and all that kind of thing. And by the way, ever since then, every time Louise and I have bought a house, we have looked for houses that had saunas built into them, or we built them, or just put in a big bathtub, so that we could take long hot baths. So what happens? Well, when you heat your body up a whole bunch, it's subject, and I think this is a perfect topic, by the way, for the coldest week of the year. It subjects your body to something called heat stress, which is a mild increase in the core temperature of your body. And what this does is it produces, it does a whole bunch of things. Number one, it helps your body do away with senescent cells. These are cells that are no longer functioning, but they're still using energy, and they produce inflammatory markers. Senescence and senescent cells are associated with aging. Another is that it controls the rate of protein development and protein folding. There's a whole family of proteins that are produced by your body as a result of exposure to high heat, and they're called heat shock proteins, HSPs. And sauna increases the levels of this. Sauna increases the functioning of the mitochondria. These are the little engines inside each one of your cells that produce energy from the nutrients in your bloodstream. And it helps regulate inflammation. And it's actually good for your heart. There's a study, the Kaipo ischemic heart disease, a risk factor study, found that people who take frequent saunas have lower rates of heart disease. Saunas also help regulate lipids, fats, HDL, LDL, all that kind of stuff. And then there's your brain. Saunas actually help you revive or build new brain tissue, new neurons, nerve and brain tissue through something called neurotropic factors. and brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. You see a significant increase in BDNF when you are subject to hot water insertion, immersion or sauna. So bottom line, take a hot bath or take a sauna during these cold winter days if you want to lengthen your life and improve your health. And I'm not offering medical advice here, but I can tell you, I have been doing this for 50 years, nearly. And I find that, if I get even a little bit sick, I take a long hot bath or take a sauna and boom, it just knocks it right out. So something to think about.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And the article with the links to all the various science and all these things that I just talked about is over at wisdomschool.com. It's right at the top of the page. We'll be back with your calls right after this. So, what's on your mind? Let's pick up some calls here. Samurai in Norcross, Georgia. Hey, Samurai, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I have three questions to ask you.
Pick one.
My first question is will AI do to capitalism what the Conjun did to slavery? Because I read your book, The History of American Oligarchy, and when you were talking about slavery in oligarchy, you one of your chapters in your headlines was when cotton is king, cotton makes kings, and you showed us and you detailed how in those days that where cotton was king, cotton made kings, which were the slave owners, the people down in the South that were owning the slaves and owning the plantations. Well, now these days AI is king. And capitalism is here. Will AI,
what impact will AI have on capitalism? In other words,
will AI make kings just like the con?
Oh, I think so. I think so, Samurai. It's a new technology that can do all kinds of cool stuff. Louise has been creating images for our Substack newsletters, for example, using one of the AI engines out there, DALL-E. There's all kinds of stuff that AI can do. And it is going to, and it already is actually, altering the kind of capitalistic landscape across the United States. You're seeing more and more functions, more and more job functions. This is where technology comes for white-collar jobs and creative jobs, frankly. I mean, there are now newsletters and websites that are being created that are being done entirely with AI. And, which is, it's troubling on the one hand because, as a creator, as somebody who writes books and articles and things, I'm concerned about AI competing with me on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a great tool. There's a new AI-based search engine, Perplexity. I think it's perplexity.ai. I would have to look it up. I've got it installed on my computer at home, but I don't have it here at the studio. And it just does an amazing job. It speaks to you or writes to you in plain English. I'll ask it a question, is this accurate, or can you tell me about this, or what about that, or whatever, and it just goes out and searches the internet and comes back and says, well, yes, this word and this, and it's fascinating. Google is now rolling that out. Microsoft has done that with Bing. They've got AI now in their search engine. It's so I think you're right. I think it's going to over the short term anyway. It's probably going to be another way that the Silicon Valley masters of the universe can consolidate their own wealth. Samurai, thanks for the call and thanks for the question. It was a good one. It's 20 minutes past the hour. I'm picking up your calls here for the rest of the hour. I'll be right back. with whatever's on your mind. Stay tuned. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. And welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. So what is on your mind? We got a whole bunch of topics that we're talking about today, and you know, pretty much anything else. Jeff in Chicago. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Yeah, Tom. Actually, I moved from Chicago. I'm in Cave Creek, Arizona now, outside of Phoenix.
Oh, let me fix that. Mark needs to be asking people, confirming. So Cave Creek. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
I've been there. I used to have friends who lived there.
Oh, it's beautiful out here. Politics is crazy, but the land is beautiful. Yeah. My question is from your program on January 4th. What was titled, "Why Don't Americans Know Who's Manipulating Our Political System?" And Rick, and I kind of laughed because it sounded like the caller you had earlier, it might have been the same guy. You were talking about the Supreme Court. And your statement, which really blew me away, and it's been weighing heavy on me, your quote was, "It's the one agency you cannot lobby."
Right.
And, you know, in today's world, if you have enough money, I see these guys lobbying Supreme Court justices all the time.
That's true. That's true. That's what Leonard Leo kind of does for a living, you could argue.
Yeah. It just bothered me that you said that, because I think that agency can be lobbied.
Yeah, you're absolutely right,
You
Jeff.
said it cannot.
Thank you for correcting me. There's no way the average person can lobby the Supreme Court, but you know, if you're wealthy and you've give enough money to the Supreme Court, what is a society? There's some little group. They bought a building next door to the Supreme Court building now. They've got a library in there, and they do these things with the justices and whatnot. And it's basically a fancy way of lobbying the Supreme Court. You're absolutely right. I retract my statement and agree with you.
Thank you. I got one more thing to say, because I love Rachel too, and I'm always telling my wife, you know, I'd love to see Thom Hartmann and Rachel Maddow have a kid. That kid would be so intelligent. And she says, you know, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, it won't. But okay. All right.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Jeff. Jill in Lamar, Colorado. Hey, Jill, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. My sense of this inflation is directly a direct result of Trump's imposing the tariffs on China. I believe it was about $80 billion that it cost us, the consumers, that China just passes on the cost back to the consumer. And can you maybe comment on if that's a correct idea, and if it isn't, the Democrats using it, particularly Biden, in arguments against Trump?
Yeah. The logic that Trump used when he put those tariffs on Chinese goods, which, by the way, I am, broadly speaking, a supporter of tariffs as a way of regulating domestic economies. As was Alexander Hamilton. He laid this out with what was called the American Plan in 1793. He did a report to Congress called the Secretary of the Treasury's Report on American Manufacturers, which you can read. And there's several chapters about it in my book on neoliberalism. In fact, I end the book with this. And the point is that if you want manufacturing to happen in the United States, you want to favor domestic manufacturers, and you want to disfavor or handicap foreign manufacturers, particularly when foreign manufacturers have access to cheaper labor than American labor. And from the founding of our republic up until the Civil War, 100%, our average tariffs were around 35–40% on everything, pretty much everything. And 100% of all the revenue that the federal government ran on was tariffs. From the Civil War to World War II, it was around, or from the Civil War to World War I, it was around 2/3 of the total government revenue was tariffs. World War I saw a huge increase in the income tax. It went from 25% up to 91%, and so tariff and they started reducing tariffs after World War I, and so up until World War II, tariffs were about 1/3 of our revenue. Now they're only 2% of our revenue. So the tariffs are relatively meaningless right now. They're not large enough or high enough to actually influence policy. And I don't think that Trump's tariffs created general inflation. They might have increased the price of some goods that were being imported, but apparently not enough to shift that manufacturing here to the United States. But you know, it's a step in the right direction, frankly. And that's why Biden has kept most of Trump's tariffs in place. That's probably not the answer you were expecting, Jill.
No, but also from the farming aspect, we're farmers, and you know, because the China trade, all the agriculture markets were all screwed up with the Trumps.
Oh yeah,
and
well
China.
they retaliated by going after American farmers, and that's a problem. I would say that Trump just did it very, very badly. I mean, he did it very clumsily. Jill, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what do you think about tariffs? Back with your calls right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious, whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X.
Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a Black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Let's pick up your calls here. Tony in Blue Island, Illinois. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Listen to you every day. Only thing I listen to in the car.
Well, thank you.
My concern is where's the Progressive Party these days? Particularly the leaders, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie. I don't see them anywhere. There are just so few outlets for the Progressive Party on the radio. Yours is the only one that I can find anywhere in this area. This is the Chicago metropolitan area. Mm-hmm. And it's just a shame. I don't see them even on Face the Nation or any of the Sunday shows. Why not?
Sean says Bernie was on State of the Union yesterday, but no, I know what you're talking about, Tony, and we've talked about this before here, that there are probably the ratio of right-wing billionaires to left-wing billionaires is like 50 to 1. For some reason, when you become worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, very often your politics tend to slide hard right, particularly in the tax cut category. Chicago is very fortunate that they've got a great progressive radio station that is owned by a local, very wealthy guy, and God bless him.
But all of my efforts, and I wrote about this for The Nation a couple of years ago. I've written a bunch of op-eds over the years. The first starting back in 2003, actually. It led to the creation of Air America Radio. Trying to encourage wealthy Democratic donors to actually invest in media. But it's just not happening. I can also tell you from being in the media and being on the receiving end of pitches all the time, hey, have this guest on your show kind of thing, that the right-wing PR machine that books people onto programs, particularly television programs, is huge. There's a whole huge ecosystem of it. On the left, it's pretty much non-existent. Again, because there's no left-wing billionaires who are funding these things, or wealthy people. And I think it's a real tragedy because America really is not just 50-50. America is actually more progressive than the policies that we're experiencing. The majority of Americans actually want things like, expanding Medicare and Medicare for all and strengthening Social Security and cleaning up the air and water and doing something about climate change and getting a clean power grid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And none of those things are happening because of Republican obstruction, and which is being driven by the media. You've also got this incredible scam this money-making thing that Rupert Murdoch pioneered back in the day in Australia and then took to the UK and to the US, which is basically lies for profit. Get people all cranked up. You sell hate and anger and outrage and racism. And I mean, literally the other day on Fox News, you had a discussion of whether the door that blew off the Boeing airplane was because Boeing has a DEI program and they're hiring too many black people, and oh my God, therefore, it's crazy. Or actually, they were going after United. Well, I think they were going after both United and Boeing. So it's just the playing field is so heavily tilted toward the right because the resources are there on the right, because it tends to be self-reinforcing. If you get a huge tax break, you take a little bit of that money and you feed it back to the people who gave you the tax break. And Democrats are not running around saying, hey, we're going to give billionaires tax breaks. And so the billionaires aren't throwing money at them, and they're not. I'm starting to ramble here, but am I making sense, Tony?
Well, yes, you do. It seems like the bad guys on the media and in other facets are predominant.
Yeah, and it's profitable. I mean, the Murdoch family is worth billions now as a result of selling hate for years and years.
My feeling amongst normal people is that we're all progressives, that when we talk, and except for when you talk to Trump supporters, of course. And there's a disconnect there with the media somehow, and the billionaires controlling it and Citizens United. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. Why the movement isn't stronger.
I sat in the office of a United States senator with a billionaire who owned 900 radio stations. He had just bought one of the 4 large radio networks in the country. And
what happened to the Sherman Antitrust Act?
It's in 1983, Ronald Reagan stopped enforcing it. Anyhow, I sat with this billionaire, and the senator who had been on my program said to the billionaire, you've got 900 radio stations. How many of them do you do political talk radio on? And he was 250, 300, something like that. And he's like, you should put some progressive programming on. Tom's sitting right here. He's got a great show. He gets great ratings. He regularly beats Rush Limbaugh in multiple markets. This was about 10 years ago. And you should put him on the air. And this guy says to the senator, he says, I would never put a progressive on any of my radio stations because I'm not going to put anybody on the air who's going to argue in favor of raising my taxes. And the senator's jaw just dropped. I mean, but it was a candid response. And I was sitting right there. This is a first-person story. And
what
can you do?
I think we've gone beyond the pale here, though.
I agree. I agree. And we've got to do something about it. But
tolerated from politicians. It's
Yep.
It's gone too far.
Yep, I completely agree, Tony. I just don't have, I have been banging my head on this wall, against this wall, ever since in 2003 or 2002, I guess it was December 2002, I wrote that article for Common Dreams, Talking Back to Talk Radio, which became the business plan for Air America. I mean, we actually had a pretty good little progressive network here. We were on 54 radio stations all across the United States, and the mistake we made was leasing those stations from Clear Channel. We were on 54 Clear Channel stations. We were in every major market in the United States. It was quite successful. And what happened was Mitt Romney's Bain Capital bought Clear Channel. And within a year, maybe 2 years, they had flipped. And now that they own the stations, they just started. It happened right here in Portland. I moved to Portland to be on this station, to do my show out of this station here. I did a local morning show, and then I did this national show. And, they flipped it to sports. And their excuse was, we can't sell advertising. And, in some cases, there was some truth to that. And the reason why was because these stations had always had Rush Limbaugh, right-wing talk radio. And so they had hired salespeople who were right-wingers. And those right-wingers had gotten to know the local Republican Party and the local car dealer who was an activist in the Republican Party and the local restaurant that's an activist in the Republican Party. And you give them a progressive radio station and say, here, go out and sell this. And number one, they don't want to do it because they're conservatives. And number two, they don't know any progressives. They don't show up for the Democratic Party meetings. They don't know who the big business people in town are who are donors to the Democratic Party. I mean, even here in Oregon, right? So, a couple of stations. I put together a road show. I put together a PowerPoint presentation. I traveled around to about 30 of our affiliates of our Air America radio stations, and I did a presentation about what you need to do is hire a progressive salesperson who will show up at the Democratic Party meetings and who will get to know, where the progressives are in town and who they are and what they're all about, so that they can sell. And those stations that did it had financial success. The stations that didn't do it were, yes, in fact, just like Mitt Romney's company said, having trouble selling progressive talk radio because they had right-wing salespeople. And that was kind of an organic process because the whole thing started with Rush Limbaugh in 1980, whatever it was, 86 or 89, whenever he started. We were moving in the right direction and it was going well. And then, Romney's company, bought all 1,000, 1,200 stations, including the 54 that we were leasing. And that was the end of that. So, Tony, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. I wish I had an easy answer for the problem that you've identified.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Tom in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I just wanted to talk a couple things about Ukraine, and our American policy there, and two things we could do to help those people. One would be to declare Russia a terrorist state, which it is. And the other would be to confiscate all the money that Russia has invested in American banks that's now frozen, and give it to the people of Ukraine so they could buy weapons to protect themselves from Russia.
There's a debate going on within the Biden administration about just that, about doing that. And Russia has come out and made some really serious threats about if you do that, we're going to go after your assets, and the retaliation will be beyond any, et cetera, et cetera. But I agree
our assets I'm sorry. I was going to say our assets in Russia, Morgan Stanley Bank is making a fortune over there advising the oligarchs there on how to protect their money from the United States.
Yeah, Coke Oil is still operating over there, Coke Industries.
Yeah, and I really don't care about Morgan Stanley or the Koch brothers.
Yeah,
I care about the Ukrainians being murdered.
Yeah, and it's happening literally every day. Every day, another couple dozen people are killed, and buildings are destroyed in cities, and it's just this insane war of attrition. I'm with you, Tom. I would love to see Russian assets seized and used to arm Ukraine. Tom, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
45 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back, Drew. Hey, Drew, thanks for watching us on Twitter. What's up?
Hey, Tom, this is literally a, X, marking whatever spot is to be found in current conversations. I very much appreciate jumping in on this because I've only read very limited amounts of your writing, but I just found you also on Kindle, and we'll be downloading lots and lots of good stuff to read. Cool. My biggest concern, I guess, publicly right now is obviously what's going to happen in November. And in that context, I'm just wondering when the Democrats are going to get their finger out on messaging. The Republicans, and more to the point, the conservatives, have got a major infrastructure, as you pointed out. They've got big money. They've got a broadened message machine, which is not only radio, TV, but also community newspapers. I came across, I can't remember who it was or whatever, but there was a fellow, I believe in Arkansas, who owns a couple of hundred of local, penny saver, News Weekly type things around the region, the South, the Midwest, et cetera. And he is as conservative as they come, and his opinions infiltrate into his press. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure there's a whole lot happening on the Democratic or the progressive side that matches any of that.
You're right.
And the one thing I just wanted to point out, because I came across this, and I really would love to figure out how to combat. There's a place you're probably familiar with called the Conservative Partnership Institute, CPI.org, mm-hmm. which has the unfortunate, in your face, having a co-conspirator with Trump named Meadows on his front page. And I think he was appointed president of the place originally. And if you go down, drill down into their website, they bought a building on Capitol Hill, so they're very close to the center of action. They've got conference rooms, and they've also got a broadcast studio training speakers, training media personalities, and training other types to come and grab the microphone. Mm-hmm. They also, if you go to the top of the page, you'll see they have a method for legacy giving. If you're a conservative and you're going to die someday, you want to make sure that your legacy continues, just give these guys some money.
Yep. So
it's a big concern, and then you look at the other side, and where is the Democratic messaging machine? It's Win Red or Act Blue. Where is the middle part that gets messages across without asking me for $5 in every email I get?
Yeah, there's not a lot. And this goes back to the problem that I identified before. Rich people, by and large, don't want to pay taxes. The Republican Party, the conservative movement, has, certainly since Reagan anyway. I mean, Nixon was fine with a 91% income tax rate or 74% income tax rate. But since Reagan, Republicans have been cutting taxes on rich people, and rich people have been returning the favor, essentially. And thus...
I appreciate you speaking to all of these issues, and I will be a continuing regular listener. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Picking up your calls here, Maureen in Geneva, Illinois. Hey, Maureen, what's up?
Well, I'm calling about Nikki Haley. She was in a debate about a week ago with the governor of Florida, DeSantis, and she made the statement that if she were president, she would put the Chinese back in their place. This woman is a classist. She apparently believes that the wealthy belong at the top and the poor at the bottom. And
that's characteristic
she's the
right
one
across
that's going to judge where they go.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know why the media didn't pick up on her immediately.
That's standard
and the
Republican talk, Maureen.
Fools to keep her.
I mean, the GOP is all about caste, you know, an economic caste system in the United States.
Well, we better make sure they lose and lose badly this time.
I think they're going to. Now, you know, I have been, I was wrong once in 2016. So I guess I've been wrong before, but I think that this year, I don't think that Trump can win the White House. I don't think he has coattails. I think his base has shrunk, the GOP has been shrinking, and I think if he doesn't get the nomination, that he's going to stand on the outside throwing stones at the GOP or even do a third-party run, and he's really going to hurt the Republican Party. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're all lining up to endorse him right now, because they're just terrified of, they're more afraid of his wrath than they are desirous of his love, frankly. But you know, we'll see. But I agree with your analysis, Maureen. Thank you, Chuck in Coldwater, Missouri. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hi, everybody. I tell you what, I was so disappointed in CBS News putting Joe Manchin on there yesterday. He's a total idiot. You know, I'm so tired of hearing about the border. And, you know, there's a reason all those people are crossing the Rio Grande. It's because the border is closed.
Right.
And they can't come into the port of entry. We've got 300 of them on the southern border. Bring the refugees in through the ports of entry and then deal with them there.
Well, we're actually doing that. We're actually doing that, Chuck. And that's the whole thing with this app that the Biden administration rolled out, where you apply for entry from outside the country and you get in line, basically. But you know, not all people who want to get into the United States even know about this, much less know how to do it. And a lot of them are being lied to by coyotes who are making big profits off it.
Refugees can't wait in line.
Yeah.
Refugees are trying to escape oppression, or they're starving to death, or they're escaping from violence. They're going to come whether you tell them to fill out a form or not. Bring them in, and then we can deal with them. We can put them on a bus back across wherever they came from, but direct all the refugees to the ports of entry. Don't make them wait. Bring them in immediately. Have buses waiting for them. Take them to the judges, and if they're a refugee, they're in. Here in Missouri, we used to have 10 congressional seats. We have 8. Because we're losing population, we're not growing. We need those people.
Yeah.
Bring them in and solve the issue. And shame on Abbott. He should go to jail for murder.
I'm with you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
I'm with you. Thank you, Chuck. Michelle in Roseville, Michigan. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've been a long-time listener. Okay, I was wondering if you would happen to know. I'm an independent voter in Michigan, and if you would happen to know, I got a ballot selection form saying, "Dear voter, although you are on the permanent ballot list and scheduled to automatically receive a ballot for every election, you need to select a ballot type for the upcoming 2024 presidential primary." Right. And it tells you to check Democrat, Republican, or ballot without presidential primary.
Right.
Why? I mean, I chose independent on purpose so they wouldn't know what I was going to choose.
Right. Here's how it works, Michelle. Some states have what are called open primaries, where anybody can vote in a primary on any party. And other states have what are called closed primaries, and it sounds like Michigan has adopted a closed primary. It was open primaries when I lived there. I grew up in Michigan.
Yeah, it was. It's always been open.
Yeah, but apparently they've changed the rules of the game, and I don't know when or how or why. But it sounds like a closed primary. And a closed primary is like, I'm a Democrat. This is my club. I joined this club intentionally. I want to hang out with people who are, who share my values, and we are going to decide who our candidate's going to be. And we frankly don't want Republicans telling us who our candidate should be, or even independents, because this is our club. And that's the rationale for closed primary. And that's why, if you lean Democratic, if you're in a state with closed primaries, you really need to register as a Democrat.
So you think I should re-register?
I would suggest that if you want to vote in the Democratic primary. I mean, this Democratic primary for president is going to be pretty inconsequential. There's really no serious challenge to Joe Biden, but you may have other races that you'd like to vote in. Michelle, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's a great question, and good luck. I wish you the best. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. We've got freezing rain in the forecast for tomorrow, so knock wood. But in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Our local newspapers.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at Thom. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!